Saludos a esta hora en toda la región. Gracias por sintonizar Máxima en nuestras diferentes frecuencias, en los diferentes estados. Un abrazo gigante. Tengo el honor de saludar una vez más al abogado Ted Murphy. Él es abogado de inmigración y con muchísimos años de experiencia, no solamente como abogado, pero también él ha sido uno de los fiscales del gobierno federal. So, Ted, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Good morning, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so
as
much.
Always.
You tell us a little bit about you, because we have a new listeners today. They want to know a little bit more about you. You used to work for the federal agency, right?
Oh, I did. That was many years ago, though. But
Yeah.
I worked as a federal prosecutor in immigration for almost 11 years, from 1997 until 2007.
Oh, wow.
But in 2007, as my wife says, I was kind of like the Grinch. But when I left the agency and started to work for private people, my heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. El abogado Ted Murphy, él trabajaba como uno de los fiscales que perseguía a los criminales para el gobierno federal. Y dice que trabajó 10 años, desde los 97 hasta el 2007. Y en algún momento él ya decidió trabajar con su oficina privada. Y entonces dijo que él tenía que ponerse de un lado diferente a la situación. Así que así es como está el trabajo del abogado. So, Ted, what was the most, I would say, crucial momentum for you in your career? I can imagine, because you've been in the border, you've been in many court cases, in many situations that in some cases probably is broken heart, And what is the most memorable case that you remember that you help people?
Well, there are 2.
Okay.
They come to mind, and they were both. One was when I was in private practice before I worked for the government, and then another one soon after I left the government about 15 years ago. So the first one dealt with a 14-year-old boy from China whose mother died in childbirth. His father became a Catholic priest, part of the underground system, and he was. His father disappeared in a raid on the house in China. So the Chinese mafia, the snakeheads, took him and brought him into the United States to help run drugs and things like that. And immigration found him, and he needed representation. So I took the case for free. Just a 14-year-old boy with no parents, nobody else in the world. Wow. Detained by immigration in Pennsylvania, Center for Children, and we were able to get asylum for him. So that was one of the turning points when I decided that immigration was what I was going to do full time.
Is a problem, yeah. So that was in the beginning of your private career, I believe.
Right, that was a year after I left law school.
Yeah. Dice que cuando él, un año y medio después de que dejó la universidad para hacerse abogado, ya fue abogado. Dice, le preguntaba cuáles son una de las situaciones más posiblemente memorables para él en su carrera. Y dice Ted que cuando hubo un caso de un niño que fue traído secuestrado desde China, su papá se convirtió en un sacerdote underground allá en China y su mamá había fallecido. Entonces a él le secuestraron estos traficantes de personas, le trajeron a Estados Unidos, en Pensilvania, y el Departamento de Inmigración le rescató a él, pero dice que él no tenía nadie aquí en los Estados Unidos y Ted decidió hacerle el caso de asilo a este muchacho de 14 años para ayudarle a que se quede en Estados Unidos asilado. Y pues es una de las historias. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, there's one other thing with that. We see this a lot today.
Dice que el día de hoy él mira muchas de estas situaciones así.
Visas for children, special immigrant visas for children who are orphans.
Dice que visas especiales para niños huérfanos o para niños que vienen solos.
In that particular case, it was one of the first cases in the United States that was successful for detained children where we challenged the law in federal court and in state court, and they changed the federal regulations as a result of that case.
Dice que el caso que él manejó de este niño chino, dice que hizo que muchas leyes se cambien, que la ley de migración cambiara, porque él tuvo que pelear en el estado para que cambien las leyes a favor de la persona que había sido arrestada primero, pero luego que necesitaba que le den un asilo, y dice que las leyes han ido cambiando a favor de los niños. So now, the question is on the border. It's a lot of, in fact, today and yesterday, the New York Times and all over the media is claiming that hundreds of thousands of children, minors, been working illegally in so many companies. And the government is accepting the fact that they never listen to the complaints. They never listen to the red flags of this case. And many children, 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, working illegally in the United States and so many companies. Is that happening?
Yes, it is happening. And it's been happening for a very long time.
Wow. Le digo que lo que está pasando ahora mismo, que el New York Times y muchos periódicos han publicado, que el gobierno ya acaba de revelarse la información de que hubieron muchas banderas rojas diciéndole al gobierno, hey, hay muchos niños que llegaron solos y que están siendo explotados por muchas empresas haciéndoles trabajar ilegalmente. Y el gobierno acaba de decir que nunca escucharon esas red flags, que sí tenían conocimiento, pero que nunca hicieron nada. Entonces, now, a lot of family members probably, Ted, in United States, Latinos, non-Latinos, anyone who is coming illegally to the United States at this time, they might know someone or they might have someone in the house that is a minor. Let's talk about minors now.
Okay.
When they cross the border and then they are an accompanying minor, what is the process for them? What is the protection for them in these kind of situations? Because let's say I got a family member or a friend, and I say, okay, I'm Kevin Andrade, I'm going to take care of these children. And I accept that responsibility. And what is next for this kid?
Well, we're not even there yet.
Okay.
If you're not related to the child,
Okay.
they're not going to release that child to you.
Okay.
They need to protect children very carefully. So if they're able to identify a family member, it could be a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, they go through a vetting process to make sure the person that's going to sponsor them is not a criminal.
Okay.
Even if they're here illegally, as long as they're not a criminal, they may get released to the family member rather than immigration keeping the child, detained.
Somewhere, yeah.
Right.
Dice que le preguntaba, le digo, ¿qué pasa cuando un menor de edad cruza la frontera, viene a los Estados Unidos solo, no acompañado, como le llaman, le arresta a inmigración y deciden entregarle a un adulto? Dice que ahorita no se está entregando a cualquier persona, que lo que el gobierno quiere es entregarle si no es el papá, la mamá, un primo, un tío, alguien, una persona relacionada con el niño para que se haga cargo de la custodia. Now, again, the New York Times is releasing information yesterday and today that is saying that a lot of kids that have been released, not necessarily to family, friends, or members of the family. And that is what the problem is, the exploitation of these children. It's happening in the United States, and it's blowing people's mind how that happens. Is too many kids coming along?
That's part of it. But it's not just the children who are coming in unaccompanied. It's also children who are being brought here as part of church groups to do service. Okay. But then they're put to work in building cleaning services, places like that, and not going to religious instruction or a religious retreat, and they end up staying here. So a lot of it is people who come in with visas for a short period of time, but they want to work, they want to help their families. They're being told that they have to work to help take care of expenses for the sponsor. So they get pushed into these different things, and with children, many of them are going to do what they're told to do by the person who's sponsoring. You have to help with this. And a lot of times there's threats. If they've come in, if the cartels have come through the border and they've brought the kids in, they're telling the parents, well, we're not going to release your children unless you pay for this, or they tell the children then you have to help with this, or it's going to be a problem for your family members who are still in your country. Wow. So there's a lot of different angles that people take to force the children into working.
Vamos a empezar a recibir sus mensajes con preguntas para el abogado Ted Murphy. Si tiene preguntas sobre inmigración, mande un mensaje ahora al 302-858-5119. Déjeme traducir esta última parte que hablamos con el abogado. Le decía, en Estados Unidos ahorita se está hablando de que hay muchos miles de niños trabajando ilegalmente en fábricas, en muchas empresas, y dice que el problema es que no solamente es que posiblemente el gobierno no le ha puesto atención a esto, pero además muchos niños que han cruzado con otros adultos que a lo mejor son traídos con grupos religiosos para que hagan algún entrenamiento, algún campamento de religioso, y no necesariamente vienen a eso, sino les obligan a trabajar, y dice, y les obligan a trabajar para que puedan pagar sus gastos. En otros casos, los miembros del cartel, cuando agarran a los niños, les extorsionan a los familiares, les dicen, mira, si quiere que deje ir a tu hijo, tienes que pagarme tanto. Y dice, es una serie de problemas que enfrentan las familias precisamente por esto.
So part of that, I want to add on to that, thanks, Kevin, that when you have a large number of people that are coming across the border at one time and they're just being released, and that's what's been happening the last couple of years, where you've got very large groups coming to the border. Border Patrol is limited in what they can do. They just don't have enough people. They don't have enough detention space to put in people, so they're being released. They're questioned, they're processed, maybe they're fingerprinted. They're being told to report in at the nearest immigration facility to where their final destination is, and there's no check. They're not put into a process yet. They're just let in.
So it's overwhelming, the situation, definitely.
It is, and part of what we wanted to talk about today with the changes that are going to happen on May 11th.
Yeah.
As a result of a lot of this, but when you have so many people coming across the border and they're not tracking them, and many of them are children, it's easy to exploit the children.
Wow.
And put them into situations that are really criminal.
Yeah. Dice que desafortunadamente la cantidad increíble de niños que están llegando sin sus familiares, sin sus padres, hace que también el sistema de inmigración esté abrumado y que muchos niños, dice, en vez de que les tengan estos menores de edad metidos en un centro de detención, les dejan ir, dice, y en esos problemas, en esos casos, muchos de estos niños terminan en las manos equivocadas y son víctimas de explotación en los Estados Unidos. Entonces, lamentablemente, esta cantidad increíble de gente que ha estado entrando ha hecho que el sistema cambie. Ahora, dice que hay cambios a partir del 11 de mayo. So, what are the exactly changes on May 11th?
Well, the big changes on May 11th is Title 42 ends on May 11th, and that's the health-related provisions that were put in on the border because of COVID-19. Those were put into effect 3 years ago.
So that ending, and what do you think is going to be the response for that? Because that Title 42 that was made in order to send the people back to Mexico and wait there until they give an answer, right?
It was Title 42 was put in place so that people that were infected with COVID or other medical issues were not allowed to come into the United States until they were cleared and everything. It was a way to control the number of people that were trying to come in.
Dice que el título 42 el 11 de mayo se termina completamente y que este programa fue creado para que las personas que estaban con COVID en ese tiempo tenían que esperar al otro lado de la frontera hasta que ya estén sanos para poder entrar a los Estados Unidos. Ese programa termina absolutamente. Ya el 11 de mayo ya no hay más de ese plan para que la gente regrese o se quede en México esperando a que estén limpios o sanos y poder entrar a los Estados Unidos. So now that means people is going to be able to just walk through, or what's going to happen? Because there's a lot of concern.
Well, that's what they're afraid of. Title 42 have been used as over this past year. Really, the COVID problem is still there, but the major part of it was over last year. The Biden administration extended Title 42 to help control the massive number of people trying to get through the border. So that ends on May 11th. What they're afraid of is that large numbers of people are going to show up on May 12th and try to come through. So the new provisions that they're putting in place to control asylum seekers is what the replacement is.
So, but we don't know what the replacement is yet.
Oh, we do know what it is.
What is it?
They announced that in February. So they're putting into place new asylum rules that are very, very restrictive, and there's a couple of different points in there.
Okay, well, let's go review one by one. Dice que a partir del 11 de mayo, ya sin el título 42 que restringía la entrada de las personas, y tienen temor el gobierno de que muchas personas vayan a querer cruzar la frontera en cantidades grandes. Y el gobierno dice que ya en febrero anunció unas nuevas reglas para recibir el asilo. Las personas que quieran asilo van a tener que cumplir con algunos requisitos. So, what are those requirements for the new asylum process?
All right. Well, this applies only to the southern border.
Esto solamente aplica para la frontera del sur con México.
There's different rules for the Canadian border.
Dice que las reglas cambian para la gente que está en la frontera de Canadá.
An individual who wants to apply for asylum must present themselves at a port of entry.
Dice que los que quieren entrar para pedir asilo tienen que presentarse en un puerto de entrada de la frontera sur.
Right, let me back up just a minute. This goes into effect May 11th.
Esto entra en vigencia el 11 de mayo.
And the proposed rule is going to be effective for 2 years until May 11th, 2025.
Y este cambio, esta regla va a estar efectiva hasta el 11 de mayo del 2025.
So in that 2-year period, starting on May 11th,
Este 2 años de periodo, empezando el 11 de mayo,
people coming to the southern border who want to apply for asylum must go to a port of entry.
la gente tiene que ir para un puerto de entrada. No pueden nada más cruzar la frontera si quieren asilo.
Before they ask for asylum, they have to get on their cell phone and use an app called CBP-1.
Dice que antes de poder entrar tienen que tener un teléfono para que puedan tener una aplicación que se llama CBP-1.
So they have to get an appointment.
Tienen que hacer una cita con esa aplicación.
There's problems with that, and we can talk about that in a few minutes.
Y eso vamos a hablar en un ratito más.
For individuals who try to cross the border illegally, not at a port of entry, they're not going to be eligible for asylum.
Dice la gente que a partir del 11 de mayo cruce ilegalmente la frontera no van a ser elegibles para asilo.
For individuals who've come from other countries, not from Mexico, they're going to be required to have applied for asylum through any country that they transited, that they crossed through before they got to Mexico.
Dice que ellos van a pedir que cualquier persona que no sea mexicana, que venga de otro país, va a tener que primero pedir asilo en otro país antes de pedir asilo en los Estados Unidos.
So in Central America, we get a lot of people coming into the United States from Central America and many other parts of the world.
Mucha gente viene de Centroamérica a los Estados Unidos y también de otras partes del mundo.
For the countries in Central America, really only one has a very good asylum program, and that's Costa Rica.
Dice que solamente hay un país en Costa Rica que tiene un gran plan de asilo que se llama Costa Rica.
The other countries, their asylum process has many flaws.
Dice que los otros países de Centroamérica lamentablemente tienen muchas fallas, muchos problemas.
And it takes a very long time to get decisions on the asylum.
Y toma muchísimo tiempo para que le den una decisión sobre el asilo.
So if you get an individual, for example, who's from, let's say, El Salvador and wants to apply for asylum in the United States, if they go through Guatemala and then Mexico, they must have applied for asylum in Guatemala first or in Mexico before they can apply for asylum in the United States.
Dice, por ejemplo, si una persona viene de El Salvador, ahora va a tener que primero pedir asilo en Guatemala o en México antes de pedir asilo en los Estados Unidos. Y porque caso contrario no le van a dar el asilo en los Estados Unidos. Now, what if somebody gets asylum in Guatemala or in Mexico?
Well, then they're not eligible for asylum in the United States if they've been given protection in another country.
Dice que si alguien recibe asilo en otro país, obviamente no le van a calificar tampoco. So, how the people that's going to be in the United States asking for asylum, it is a limited time to in order to wait, or they can just apply and keep walking? Because that's what's going to happen.
Well, I'm going to back up to your other question. If they get asylum in another country, that's a safe third country. So the asylum laws in the United States that were put into place in 1980 do not allow for a person to get asylum in the United States if they've been granted protection in another country.
Dice que en 1986 se creó una ley que dice que si alguien recibe asilo en otro país, en un tercer país, no le van a dar asilo en los Estados Unidos.
So under these new rules, let's take, for example, a person who is from Guatemala wants to come to the United States. They first have to apply for asylum in Mexico. And if it's denied in Mexico, then they can apply in the United States.
Dice, por ejemplo, una persona que venga de Guatemala, si quiere llegar a los Estados Unidos a pedir asilo, va a tener que primero pedir asilo en México. Si es negado el asilo en México, ahí puede pedir asilo en Estados Unidos. Caso contrario, no. Now, what if somebody, hypothetical, comes from Brazil and goes straight to Mexico, and they don't ask for asylum, just go to the border, point of entry in the United States and say, I need asylum, seeking for asylum. And then what? They won't be denied?
They may be denied under the process. want to point out a couple of things. This has happened before. About 4 years ago in 2019, under the previous administration, they put in a very similar requirement that you had needed to ask for asylum in other countries before you applied in the United States.
Dice, yo le preguntaba que qué pasa si alguien viene, por ejemplo, de Brasil y quiere entrar a Estados Unidos y no pide asilo en ningún país, solamente viene al puerto de entrada de la frontera mexicana estadounidense y dice, ok, quiero asilo. Dice, posiblemente no le van a dar, porque esto ya pasó en el 2019, ante la administración anterior, que le dijeron, ok, usted no puede entrar a los Estados Unidos porque tenemos esta limitación. Es decir, tienen que pedir asilo en otro país antes que ser negado en otro país, básicamente. Not just ask for asylum in another country. Has to be denied the asylum in another country, basically, in order to qualify, right?
Yes, that's true. But 4 years ago, there were legal challenges brought that were successful and stopped the Trump administration from imposing similar rules that the Biden administration wants to do right now.
Dice que 4 años atrás hizo un proceso para impedir que las mismas reglas que hizo Trump se puedan aplicar ahora. But now, I believe with the overwhelming quantity of people crossing the border, over 4 million people in 2 years, I believe the government is desperate right now. Because it's costing them, it's possibly going to cost them the presidency in 2024.
There's a lot of political issues right now, and rather getting into political issues, the last 2 years, the administration has really let as many people wanted to come into the United States come in. They haven't made efforts to stop that massive flow. It's a big issue. It was a big issue in the last election. It's going to be a big issue in the next election next year. So it looks like the administration is responding so that they don't lose the election next year. So I think you're accurate on that. But this has happened before. When Obama was president, that's when you started to see massive numbers of people coming to the border. A lot of detention policies were put into place when Obama was president, and the problems continued when Trump was president with a number of people trying to get in. That process slowed down a lot because of the measures that they put in at the border, but many of those were found to be illegal, like the court litigation that happened 4 years ago.
Dice que esto ya pasó antes en el gobierno de Barack Obama y obviamente hay muchos problemas políticos, dicen esto, y obviamente no queremos entrar en problemas políticos, pero yo le decía, las elecciones pasadas, el presidente Trump posiblemente perdió porque tenía reglas muy estrictas en cuanto a inmigración. Dice que anteriormente también por el tema Obama, cuando Obama y Biden eran presidente y vicepresidente, también perdieron las elecciones por el mismo tema político. Es decir, esto es una cosa que se va a seguir repitiendo. Now, let's go. We have a lot of questions. Let's start answering questions.
I do have a story I want to share with
Dice
you.
que va a contarme una historia más adelante. Let's wait for the story and just later on. Vamos con unas primeras preguntas. Dice, mi pregunta, tengo un asilo político y quiero viajar a mi país natal. ¿Hay algún permiso que me permita viajar? Ya soy residente desde hace 2 años. ¿Puedo ir aún teniendo asilo? Somebody has a political asylum and she wants or he wants to go to their own country. Is any permit that allowed me to go back to the country? I'm a permanent resident 2 years ago. I became permanent resident 2 years ago. Now, having a political asylum, can I travel or not?
Well, if you're a permanent resident now, then you don't have asylum now. But that's the way that you became a permanent resident. So there are some issues with that. But once a person has been granted asylum, a year later they're eligible for permanent residency. Once they become a permanent resident, those issues of traveling with asylum start to go away. The main issue
can be questioned on the border?
Yes, it can. And we've talked about this before a number of times. If a person has applied for asylum, it's because they believe that their life is in danger when they go back to their own country. Or it has been in danger in the past and the persecution was very severe, so they were granted asylum. If that person now wants to go back to that same country, it raises a question, was your story true? Is your life really in danger in the past?
Why do you want to go back?
Why do you want to go back? So that's the question that's raised.
La respuesta a esta pregunta de que si la persona puede viajar después de haber recibido asilo político, dice que en realidad usted ya no tiene asilo político, usted tiene residencia y sí podría viajar. Sin embargo, yo le preguntaba si al regresar a los Estados Unidos el oficial te puede cuestionar y dice que exactamente es lo que puede pasar, que cuando llegues un oficial te va a decir, ratito, usted le dieron asilo político porque usted decía que tenía miedo de ir a su país, que le seguían los políticos, etcétera. ¿Qué pasó ahora? ¿Cómo así regresó? ¿Para qué regresó? Y te pueden... Now, being a permanent resident not necessarily is a permanent status. They can be revoked at any point if they found, especially at the border, if something shady is going on, right?
There's a couple different ways that a person can lose residency. One, they give it up.
Okay.
They sign paperwork and say, I give up my residency, I'm leaving. Second way is if they stay out of the United States for too long.
Okay.
If they're out for more than a year, when they come back, they're going to be presumed to have abandoned their status. They're going to have to prove that they didn't. They can apply for a visa to come back in. It's a special visa. Or if they committed fraud to get their green card, to get their permanent residency, then that can be revoked. And that can be done at any time.
Dice que hay varias razones por las que puede perder la residencia. Una es que firmes un papel que dices que ya no quieres ser más residente y te vas. Y eso ya abandonas la visa. La segunda, o la residencia. La segunda dice, what was the second one? I completely forgot.
If they're out too long, they can be considered to have abandoned
que si
their
te
status.
quedas fuera del país más de 6 meses y se considera la que abandonaste la residencia. Entonces, cuando regresas, dice que te van a cuestionar por qué abandonaste, etcétera, etcétera, y que en algún punto en realidad lo que puedes hacer es pedir una visa para entrar y salir de los Estados Unidos. Ok, tenemos más preguntas, no sé si tenemos preguntas en Facebook, vamos con más preguntas de acá. Dice, hola, buenos días, tengo una pregunta, mi hijo está detenido por inmigración y él ya no pudo renovar DACA porque él tuvo problemas con la ley. ¿Qué probabilidades tiene mi hijo que se pueda quedar en este país o se pueda alcanzar una fianza para salir? Her or his son has been arrested for immigration, is detained in immigration. He had issues with the law, and they're asking if he has any possibilities to stay in the country or maybe make a negotiation to find an opportunity to get some kind of, I remember when you pay money to get out.
Right, a bail, a bond.
A bail, yes,
right.
A bond, yes.
Right. Well, it depends on a number of different things. One, it depends on whether he has status right now. If he has been granted asylum or anything
And I'm
like
sorry,
that.
he had DACA before.
Okay. If you have convictions, either 3 misdemeanors or 1 felony or any serious crime that you've been convicted of, you can lose DACA. DACA is not a permanent status. It's temporary. So depending on the crimes, he can lose that status and he can be placed into proceedings to be deported because of the criminal activity.
Dice que si su hijo tuvo 3 misdemeanors, son acusaciones pequeñas, o una acusación grave, puede perder el estatus de DACA o cualquier estatus temporal que tenga, porque especialmente una felonía, eso le hace un problema grave y él puede ser puesto en un procedimiento de deportación, lo que dice el abogado. Now, can they... I don't think they have an attorney, and I think that is the main issue in many cases when the people get in trouble and they just waiting and waiting to see what happened at the court, hoping that is a miracle is going to happen.
That's a very constant problem, very serious problem. If a person has just come into the United States or if they've just gotten in trouble with the police, they should be reaching out to an immigration attorney immediately. If it's a crime that they've committed, they really need to see 2 attorneys right away, a criminal defense attorney. They should never go to criminal court without a defense attorney. And a lot of defense attorneys are not immigration lawyers. They don't understand the impact that criminal activity has with immigration. So a person who is undocumented, who has been accused of crimes, really needs a very good criminal defense attorney and a very good immigration attorney that work together to figure out if there's a way that the person can stay.
Dice que yo le decía, mi comentario personal era que hay muchas personas que tienen problemas legales, tienen problemas con inmigración, no contratan a un abogado y nada más van a la corte esperando que pase un milagro, y el abogado dice que lamentablemente mucha gente, cuando cometen alguna persona un crimen, necesita 2 abogados. Uno, que le defienda, dice, nunca vaya a una corte por una acusación criminal sin un abogado. Regla número 1. Y número 2, muchos abogados criminalistas no saben el impacto que tiene en inmigración un caso de una acusación grave en este país. Entonces, que si hay oportunidades de poder defenderle, sí. Sin embargo, tienen que hablar con un abogado. Vamos con más preguntas. Parece que tenemos preguntas en Facebook.
Tenemos una pregunta.
A ver, ¿qué dice la pregunta?
¿Después de cuántos años de residencia puede uno obtener la ciudadanía hoy en día?
After how many years of permanent resident you can obtain the citizenship?
5 years.
5 años.
Or 3 years if you've served in the military or got your residency based on marriage to a U.S. citizen.
Dice que en 5 años normalmente, pero si usted ha ido al ejército, puede ser en 3 años, o si usted se casó con un ciudadano norteamericano, también en 3 años puede obtener la visa. All right? So, tengo otra pregunta. Dice, ¿una persona de México puede calificar para asilo político? Porque una sobrina mía la acribillaron con 7 balazos por no querer pagar la cuota del negocio y no querer ser amante del jefe del cartel. Y tiene miedo que haya represalias a la familia, a la mamá de mi sobrina y a los hijos de mi sobrina de 4 y 7 años. This is a really tough situation.
Wow.
Let me translate.
Okay.
Is a person in Mexico can qualify for asylum, political asylum. And I believe it's just asylum because my niece has received 7 shots from the cartel. And because she didn't want to pay the money to the cartel, and she didn't want to become a woman for the boss of the cartel, and she's very scary to have retaliations against the family and the children. She has a 4 and 7 years old kids. So, what happened in that case?
Well, in this particular case, the individual who has been harmed by the cartels, who fled because they didn't want to join, is eligible for asylum. Immediate family members, children, or spouse would also be eligible for asylum.
Even though they are not here?
They're not eligible for asylum by itself if they're not here, but if the family member is granted asylum, they may be able to apply for family members, certain family, children or spouses.
So they can bring
afterwards.
they can bring afterwards.
That's correct.
Okay, dice que en este caso de su sobrina, a quien lamentamos mucho, ¿no? I'm very sorry for this situation. Sí, dice que sí, que ella califica inmediatamente para recibir ayuda de asilo. Es importante que ella haga el procedimiento para que ella reciba, y dice que también los miembros de su familia, como esposo o hijos, puede just the wife or husband and the children, right? Immediate family members.
Other family members maybe, but it depends. They would not probably be processed as a family
But
unit.
for sure, husband and wife
and children.
and children. Pero dice que también después de que usted le den asilo y ya le digan que está con el asilo aquí, que usted puede aplicar por una visa para que sus hijos y su esposo vengan a los Estados Unidos ya como asilados y con una visa de asilo. Así que es la respuesta para esta pregunta. Tengo más preguntas. Dice, mi esposo fue atacado por delincuentes en la calle. Había ido a la tienda por leche para nuestros hijos cuando en la calle lo atacaron a golpes. Somebody has been beat by criminals on streets when he went to the store. And then he's a victim of crime. And what can he do in this case?
If that happened in the United States, they may be eligible for a U visa. That's for victims of crime. But there has to be injury, either serious physical injury or emotional injury. There must have been a report to the police and cooperation with the police during their investigation and with the prosecution if the perpetrator is caught.
Dice que en este caso, que sí, la persona que nos escribe hablándonos de este caso el marido que le dieron golpes, dice que puede aplicar para la visa U, pero hay varios pasos que hay que seguir. Lo uno, que tiene que primero haber sufrido daños ya sea mentales graves o físicos, daños graves. Y también hacer un reporte a la policía. Tiene que existir un reporte a la policía. Y lo tercero, colaborar con la policía durante la investigación para que pueda calificar para este tipo de visa. Now, when it's a U visa, the family members also can qualify, not just the victim.
That is correct.
Dice que cuando le preguntaba que si cuando alguien es víctima de un crimen, también los miembros de la familia pueden calificar, y dice que es correcto. Now, let me put you a topic that is happening since Sunday. In Georgetown, Delaware, yesterday we were looking for hours and hours and hours. The Georgetown PD and the community, we were involved in looking for a girl, 14-year-old girl, who potentially was kidnapped on last Sunday, a couple days ago, in Georgetown soccer place. Then yesterday at 9:45, they found the responsible people, the 21 years old, the 17 years old, who potentially kidnapped this girl, 14-year-old kid. And she's in with the parents now, and I believe the investigation is ongoing. What happened in that case for the victims in this situation? What could be, let's say, if they don't have any proper documentation to live in the United States?
Well, the important thing is here you've got to let the investigation go forward for a certain amount of time. Was the victim truly a victim, or did she run away? So there's some issues that I'm sure that the police are looking at. That does happen. If she truly was kidnapped, then she and her family would be eligible to apply for a U visa because of the nature of the crime. But the question there is not just being a victim of crime, but is there injury? If there's no physical injury, has there been emotional injury because of that? So if there is no physical injury,
but is it emotional injury?
Emotional. They have to be able to prove that. So they need to go to counseling. And we would have to submit counseling reports on that. If there was a sexual assault that's involved, there should be a report to the police that happened and a physical exam at the hospital or for victim services.
And I believe, normally, knowing how the police proceeds in these cases, I believe is already, that's going on, medical test and make sure, she's healthy, she's never been touched, or something like that. So le decía que con lo que está pasando con la niña hasta que desapareció el domingo en las canchas de fútbol, ¿cuál es el caso de ella? Porque en el caso de ella, dice, hay varios escenarios. Le decía, entiendo que un hombre de 21 años y otro de 17 fueron quienes se habían llevado a esta niña de 14 años, que ellos fueron arrestados anoche. La niña fue rescatada anoche por la policía de Georgetown. Y dice, hay varios escenarios. Dice, primero hay que ver si es que la niña se fue con ellos en su propia voluntad o si realmente fue secuestrada por estos tipos. Si fue así, dice que obviamente hay que ver si es que hubo daño físico, sexual o emocional. En cualquiera de los casos hay que hacer un procedimiento de seguimiento, sea psicológico, sea con un hospital, etcétera, etcétera. Y obviamente la policía tiene que seguir y ellos tienen que colaborar con la investigación de la policía. Es muy importante que esto sepa. Esta familia, de no tener documentos, podrían calificar para lo que se llama la visa U. Así que eso es muy importante que ellos sepan. Now, going to the other side of the island, what's going to happen with these kids? I'm saying kids, 21 years old. 17 years old, can be they accused, what the law is going to say about it.
Well, now you're asking me to put on my prosecutor hat from many years ago.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When they're charged, if they have a green card, if they've been granted asylum, if they have any status other than U.S. citizenship, if they get convicted of kidnapping, if they get convicted of sexual assault, they can lose their status. They would eventually end up in the immigration process. If they do not have papers, if they do not have asylum, if they are not residents of the United States, they can be detained by immigration when they're released by the police. They don't have to have a conviction. If they have pled guilty,
the arrest is enough.
The arrest may be enough.
Maybe enough.
If they've admitted committing those acts, if they make statements to the police, yes, I did that, but then they could be in trouble even without a conviction. What's going to happen with the individuals? The age is important right now.
One is 21.
21, you're an adult. In Dallas, well, all throughout the United States, once you reach the age of 18, you're an adult. If you've committed a crime, you're going to be in adult court. You're going to be in regular court. If you're under the age of 18, it depends on what the crime was that was committed. Children as young as 14 years old and younger can be prosecuted as adults, depending on what the crime is. If it's very minor, they're probably not going to be prosecuted as adults. They could be put into juvenile delinquency proceedings. So it is court. It is a criminal court. But the end result is it's not a criminal conviction. They're found delinquent. It's a bad act.
Déjame hablar de esto que es muy importante. Dice que le está hablando del caso ahora. Dice que él se va a poner la gorra de fiscal que tenía antes de ser abogado particular. Que una persona, en el caso de estos dos adolescentes, uno de 21 años y otro de 17, dice, cuando una vez que cruzas ya los 18 años de edad ya eres un adulto y pueden ser juzgados por estos crímenes, de a ver si es que le secuestraron, si le hicieron algún ataque de alguna manera, un ataque sexual, etcétera, pueden ser acusados. El de 17 también puede ser acusado como adulto dependiendo de la gravedad de la situación. Dice que si son ciudadanos, obviamente no pasa nada. Pero si tienen residencia, DACA o algún programa de protección, incluido asilo, ellos pueden perder eso y posiblemente ser deportados. Si no tienen ningún estatus, después de que salgan de la cárcel, inmediatamente pueden ser arrestados por inmigración si inmigración lo requiere. Now, let's say, if they have a temporary status, the juvenile status, the asylum status, can they lose that asylum status and then be deported?
Yes, they can.
Ok, dice que sí. Si ellos pidieron asilo recientemente porque llegaron recién, pueden perder eso y ser deportados. Tenemos más preguntas. We have a lot of more questions and we almost ending this conversation. Tenemos preguntas con Robin. ¿Cuáles son las preguntas?
La siguiente pregunta dice, buenos días, yo fui víctima de un ataque con arma de fuego en mi casa y tengo un reporte de policía. ¿Podré obtener una visa por ese crimen?
¿Cuándo fue eso? No nos dice, ¿no?
No, dice...
Ojalá nos pueda responder cuándo fue. Somebody has been attacked in their own house with a weapon, with the fire gun. And they are saying, is any case, and they have a police report. Is there any chance to apply for any status?
Yes, it's a U visa.
Dice que lo que hay es claro que sí, puede aplicar para una visa U. Esa es la respuesta. Vamos con más preguntas. ¿Tenemos preguntas?
Otra
Robin?
pregunta más.
A ver.
Dice, yo sufrí violencia doméstica.
They suffer by domestic violence.
Y apliqué desde hace 4 años.
And she applied for a U visa 4 years ago.
Aún no sé nada.
She doesn't know anything yet.
Al mes de aplicar fui por huellas y ¿cuánto tendré que esperar?
Then she went after she applied. A month later, they're asking for the digital fingerprints, but she doesn't know anything about it anymore.
The process takes very long. Right now, immigration is processing the U visas for people who filed in 2016, 7 years ago.
Dice que ahorita está tomando mucho tiempo, está tomando 7 años más o menos. La gente que está, los procesamientos de las visas ahora son para la gente que fue víctima en el año 2016.
The reason for that is there's only 10,000 that can be given each year, and there's many more. There may be 40 or 50,000 U visas filed every single year. So there's a long list.
Dice que solamente hay 10,000 visas visas U para cada año y que cada año aplican 40, 50,000 personas. Entonces, por eso es que hay un retraso enorme. Tengo una llamada telefónica en la línea. Identifique su nombre nada más y su pregunta.
Sí, Arturo. Una pregunta para el abogado. Llevo 30 años aquí en Estados Unidos. Tengo 4 hijos, todos mayores de edad. ¿Hay posibilidades que puedo calificar para la residencia?
¿Cómo entraste tú?
Indocumentado.
¿Y alguno de tus hijos está en el servicio militar?
No.
No, ok. Gracias por tu llamada. He's 30 years in the United States. He has 4 kids, all adults. And he says, is there any way that I can qualify for any status? I asked him if some of the kids are, or one of the kids are in the military. He said no, and he entered illegally.
I didn't catch it. Are the children U.S. citizens?
Yes, they're all
okay.
4.
So the children can file a visa petition for their father if they're 21 years old.
Dice que si sus hijos todos son nacidos aquí, uno de ellos puede llenar una aplicación para pedirle a usted.
If the individual came in legally with papers or was ever paroled into the United States, then they can also apply for a green card at the same time that the child files a visa petition for
Dice
them.
que el niño, uno de sus hijos, puede llenar para una petición. Si usted entró legalmente, usted puede pedir llenar una aplicación para una visa de residente.
But if there was not a legal entry,
Pero si usted no entró legalmente a los Estados Unidos,
then the person would have to leave the United States to go through consular processing, and that's when the difficulty arises because they may have to stay out 10 years before they can come back
dice,
in.
y el problema es que si es que entró ilegalmente, usted va a tener que regresar a su país para recibir consejo y posiblemente le toque esperar hasta 10 años fuera del país antes de volver a entrar a los Estados Unidos.
There is a waiver available for that, but it depends on whether the person's married to a U.S. citizen or a resident, or that person's parents are residents or U.S. citizens.
Dice que hay diferencias. Dice, a lo mejor si usted está casado con su esposa y si es americana, sus papás son residentes permanentes de Estados Unidos, puede haber diferencias. Now, I always tell people, you should talk to an attorney ASAP.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
in this case, I mean, Jesus. Dice que es importante que consulte con un abogado. Le decía yo que es importante, creo que es importante que la gente consulte con un abogado. We're going to have a few more questions. Go ahead, la pregunta, por favor.
Sí, la pregunta es, sufrí fraude, mi hijo violencia infantil, pero lo reporté con la comisionada. ¿Puedo calificar para algo? Me imagino que se refiere a algún tipo de asilo o algo.
Pero ¿sufrió fraude de qué?
Hasta ahí.
Somebody,
Y el hijo, violencia infantil.
Oh, his son or her son was victim of domestic violence or something like that, her children. So they're looking for any case that they could have when it's victims of these kind of situations.
You've got to come in and talk to an attorney.
Dice que usted tiene que hablar con un abogado. Yo lo que le voy a decir a la gente es,
Mucha
mire,
gente está pidiendo el número del abogado
sí,
precisamente.
vamos a dar el número. What is your telephone number? Let's go.
It's 302-855-1055 or 302-855-1055.
Esa
Wow,
es
muy bien.
302-855-1055. Es a free consultation.
That's correct.
La consulta es completamente gratis y con esto vamos a terminar. 302-855-1055. Si necesita hacer una consulta, ahora mismo llame. Si están ocupadas las líneas, por favor, sigan insistiendo o deje un mensaje. They can take a messages, right?
Yes.
They can leave a message.
Yes.
302-855-1055. 302-855-1055. Tengo un montón de preguntas que vamos a dejarlas ahí porque la gente no vamos a poder responder a todas. We're gonna one more question and
Sure.
we'll leave, ¿ok? Dice, ¿qué consecuencias migratorias tiene una persona si el Estado considera un plea to reckless endangerment? ¿Puede ser deportado? ¿Tiene posibilidades de pelear o quedarse? What are the consequences in immigration if somebody is plead guilty, reckless and endangerment? Can be deported or has any possibilities to fight these against?
It depends on a lot of things. Number one, do they have status in the United States already? If they do not, the commission of a crime and pleading guilty to the crime brings them to the attention of immigration. And they could be put into the deportation process just because they're in the country illegally.
Dice, depende. Si tiene estatus, posiblemente puede perder el estatus, pero si no tiene estatus, inmediatamente inmigración puede poner la atención solamente por el hecho de haber sido acusado de un caso criminal.
That's the same thing with a DUI.
Es lo mismo que pasa con el DUI.
Same thing with using fake IDs. You
Y lo
can be
mismo-
prosecuted for that.
Y lo mismo que si usted utiliza un ID falso o documentación falsa, puede ser perseguido de la misma manera.
So those you may not be deported because of those, but if you're in trouble with the police because of those, it brings you to the attention of immigration where the problem
Cuando
is.
usted es encontrado responsable de un DUI, manejando borracho, con drogas o usando documentación falsa, usted puede ser no necesariamente metido a la cárcel por eso, pero va a llamar la atención de inmigración y ellos posiblemente van a venir por usted. Now, I believe a lot of people with DUIs, they are not realizing how dangerous it is, right?
That's correct. They're not. We deal with many people who have been here many years and get multiple DUIs. Immigration is not forgiving on those. They're not going to get a bail or a bond with an immigration judge because the judges and the prosecutors believe that more than one DUI, you're a danger to the community. And many times just one DUI, if you've had too much alcohol, is a danger to the community. If you don't go to court, criminal court, and there's a failure to appear, immigration also looks at whether you're going to run away. So whether you're a flight risk or a danger to the community will determine whether you get a bond or not. And if you don't get a bond from the immigration judge,
You're done.
You're going to stay locked up until they're done your case. And most of those cases, most of those people are deported.
Dice que la gente que tiene DUIs, la gente que está manejando con alcohol mientras manejan, están borrachos, que tienen que darse cuenta de que hay varias cosas que va a pasar. Dice, si usted tiene un primer DUI y el alcohol estuvo muy alto, puede también ser puesto en manos de inmigración y no le van a dar un perdón, le van a poner en proceso de deportación si el alcohol estaba muy alto. La gente que tiene más de un DUI posiblemente van a decir que usted es un peligro para la sociedad y de todas maneras le van a querer deportar. Y obviamente van a pensar que usted es una persona muy peligrosa para la sociedad. Así que queremos que hagan la consulta. Llamen al abogado. Consulta completamente gratis. 302-855-1055. Abogado Ted Murphy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.
Yes.
Con esto nos despedimos. Mañana estaremos de vuelta aquí en Máxima, la primera.